Hello all. I think let's get started. So, hi all. Good morning or good evening. Thank you for joining us for this session on handling change notification with Microsoft Teams. And hope you are having a nice event all across other sessions. Okay. So, the session has been inspired from the Microsoft Learn module, wherein we deep dive into the Microsoft Graph, uh, and then we will look at what is mean by Microsoft Graph, how we can make use of Microsoft Graph in our day-to-day applications, and then again how we can extend that Microsoft Graph by using the .NET applications, and then we will build our own applications using that Microsoft Graph. So, if you're planning for Microsoft certification like MS 600, which is Microsoft 365 certified developer associate certification, this session will definitely help you. So the agenda for this session is we will have overview of Microsoft Graph, what is meant by Microsoft Graph, and how we can use most of the endpoints which are available from Microsoft Graphs all across other Microsoft apps and services. Then we will look into the change notifications, how Microsoft Graph help us to create those change notifications, and then we will deep dive into more concepts related to that, like creating those change notification subscriptions, and then once we have done with that, again how can we renew those change notification subscriptions. So I hope the agenda is quite interesting for everyone. Before we jump into the session, a quick introduction of me myself, Nanddeep Nachan. I'm Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services. I'm from Pune, India, mostly working on SharePoint, Office 65, Microsoft Azure, and then author of couple of books. And onto the right hand side, here are few of the social handles to get connected with me. And with me today is Smita.
Hello all, greetings. Myself Smita Nachan. I am from Pune, India. I am having a 12 plus years of experience in SharePoint and Office 365. I am author of one book, and these are some of my social handles by which you can get in touch with me. So now let's look at consuming Graph API in our application. So if you are not familiar with Microsoft Graph, it is a unified REST API for the whole organization that allows you to get a data from Microsoft applications using a single interface. So Microsoft Graph is a gateway to data and intelligence in Microsoft 365. It also provides a unified programmable model that you can use to access the huge amount of data in Microsoft 365, Windows 10, and enterprise mobility plus security, that we called it as a EMS. So you can use this huge amount of data in Microsoft Graph to build apps for your organizations. So now let's see some more overview about it. So Microsoft Graph enables developers to consume user information stored in Microsoft 365 in custom applications. So data is retrieved from Microsoft Graph through a REST API or using one of the various native SDKs provided by Microsoft. So in this session, we will explore how to work with change notification in the Microsoft Graph. So one of the benefits of Microsoft Graph is that it serves as a proxy endpoints to all of these other services. So Microsoft Graph encompass things such as Microsoft 365, Windows 10, Enterprise Mobility, and Security (EMS), and it brings all of these different services under one unified endpoint, that is graph.microsoft.com. So the advantages to using a Microsoft Graph is that it allows developers to just have a single endpoint, a resource, which means you are only going to need a single access token authenticate the different services. So each service still has its own individual permissions so that everything is still secured in an individual way. So a single endpoint makes it easier for developers to build the application. Microsoft Graph also enables easy navigation of entities and the relationships between the entities. So while there are many different Microsoft 365 services such as OneDrive for files or Outlook for contacts and calendars, so these different entities are related to each other, and these relationships are in Microsoft Graph, which makes it easy to navigate from one entity to the another entity, even if it crosses different underlying endpoints. So now let's see what are the permissions types. So there are two types of permission: user delegated permission, which is good when there is a user present in front of the keyboard. So you should be using user delegated permission. And if there is a new user around, you need application permissions. So the important thing to note that admin consent is required for both user delegated and application permissions. So now let's look at the demo. So Graph API can be accessed via single endpoint, which is https graph.microsoft.com. We can use the tool ak.ms/g, that is Graph Explorer, to easily test out graph endpoints. Now let's go to the Graph Explorer, and in the Graph Explorer we have already signed in to our M365 tenant. So in the Graph Explorer, if you want to get your profile information, you can hit this endpoint, get my profile. So this gives us information about the current user. Now we will try to set the office location for user. So for that purpose, first we need to go to Azure portal. So once we go to the Azure portal, then we need to go to Azure Active Directory. Then let's go to the users, and we will click on this user profile picture. So it will open that user profile of that person, and then we can click on the edit to set the office location as Pune, and then we will click on the save button. So once we add the data and once we clicked on the save button, so it will save our record. And after that, now let's go back to the Graph Explorer, and here you can see we can take the user profile values with Graph API. But we want to go beyond this, and we want some kind of mechanism by which whenever any of the user value or user property gets changed in Azure AD, we want Graph to notify us that something has changed, as we cannot pull it every time. So in this session, we will build a mechanism by which Microsoft Graph will notify us whether there will be any changes in a user profile values. So let's get some more information about this change notification and how you can create your own alerts. So we will implement change notification to create our own alerts. So the change notification feature enable applications to alert when data is created or changed in Microsoft Graph. So when a particular entity is created, updated, or changed, Microsoft Graph submits an HTTP post to the specified custom endpoints. So your custom endpoints listens for these messages and acts on them based on the logic defined by your business requirement. So now let's see what can you get notifications for. So you can get notifications on messages, events, contacts, users, groups, conversations, OneDrive files, and alerts. And this allows you to stay up to date and in sync with the data that is accessible via Microsoft Graph. It also allows you to avoid implementing a polling infrastructure where you submit requests to Microsoft Graph at a regular intervals to get the most recent changes. Instead, you can go back to Microsoft Graph asking for the changes when a notification is received by your application. This way, you will never miss a chance. This way, you will never miss a change to data that is exposed or was accessible via Microsoft Graph. So now let's see some of the example scenarios. So first one is when an email is received, you want to translate it from its native language to another language and make it easier for the customer to read that email. And the second one, when a new user is added to your organization, you want to automatically create an account for that user in your corporate third party time tracking system. So let's see something about the get notified when the user data changes. So we will now build a scenario wherein we will get notified when user data changes, and we will follow three simple steps. So the first one is, firstly we will create app which will build using a .NET Core Web API application. Then we will subscribe for the notification, and then we will receive the notification from the code.
Okay, so let's go into the demo of this, like how we can build entire application altogether. So the first thing is we should create an Azure AD app registration. So for that, again, we will go back to our Azure AD portal, and let us again go back to the Azure AD. And here in the left hand side, we have app registrations where we will be able to create our apps, and then those apps can be utilized inside our applications. So from here, you can just click on new registration. We can name that application, and then we have something called as supported account types, wherein we can use either of the value specified below, like who can use this application or access this API which we are building. So first option is single tenant. That means this API can be used only within this particular tenant to which we are creating this application. Secondly, this could be a multi-tenant. That means these applications or these APIs can be accessed uh, to multiple tenants. So all of the other tenants, even they will be able to access these applications or APIs. And thirdly, we have option that multi-tenant plus any of the personal Microsoft accounts, for example, Skype or even Xbox. And then lastly, we have option of personal Microsoft accounts only. So what we can do is we can just name the application, select our supported account types. So just for this demo, we will go ahead with the single tenant options. And then there is something called as redirect URI. So what it will do is it will return that authentication response to this particular URI after our users are successfully authenticated to our applications or this API which we are building. So just to save the time, I went ahead and created one application called as Graph Notification Demo, which will help us to get the notifications from Microsoft Graph. So here to this particular app, we do have application or the client ID. We have a directory or tenant ID coming from Microsoft 365 tenant, and then we have this redirect URI. So for example, if I click on redirect URI, this is taking us directly to our localhost. So we just have redirect URI configured to localhost because we will build a simple application which will, when the user is authenticated, it will send that notification onto our localhost, and from there we will process. In the production ready applications, this redirected URI can be specified as any of your custom application which might be hosted on Azure web app. Okay, so this is the configuration that we have. Secondly, we have something called as the certificates and secrets. So here to get ourselves authenticated or authorized against these apps, we can either upload a certificate. So this certificate can be even a locally signed certificate which we can upload here, or if we don't have certificate, in that case we can just create a new client secret which can expire in 1 year, 2 years, or never. So once we just name that client secret, it will create one value which we should copy, because once we move away from this particular page, we won't be able to see that value again. So whenever we will create new client secret, we will just note down that value and then we will use that. So in the development environment, it is okay that we can keep using this client secret, but in the production environment, it is always advisable that you create your own trusted certificates and upload those certificates here. And then the major part here is this API permissions. Like what kind of an permissions these particular applications or this API which we are building should have. So here in the add a permission, if I go here, we have various permissions including Microsoft Graph. So if we go to Microsoft Graph again, we have these delegated or application permissions which we just saw. And from here we have various permissions here for the API connectors, even all of the other apps and services which are running all across Microsoft 365, including calendars, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, or even to the Exchange or other things. So we can make use of that. Uh, in this particular scenario which we are building, we want to get notified whenever there is any change into the user profile property, so that we will build a scenario wherein, let's say, if any of the user joins our organizations or if any of the user gets changed on his property, user profile property, in that case we should be get notification about it, and then we can process that. So just to get the notification for that particular user profile property change, what we can do is we, we can have permissions with us for user.read and user.read.all. So at least this permission will help us to read all of the users full profiles, so that whenever there is any kind of a change, we will be able to get that change, and then we will be able to process that change in our application. So this is how we have this Azure AD app registration done. And then one more thing here is that, for example, if you add a new permission, in that case you will have to provide the consent to it. So it could be application permission, or even it could be a delegated permission. But in both the options, you will have to provide the admin consent so that we can use these permissions inside our applications. So at least the major part here is having the Azure AD app registration done. Then we should specify the redirect URI to which the notification, or at least when the user will be authenticated, will be sent to. Then the next thing is certificates and secrets, wherein which will help us to get authenticated against this API or this application which we are building. And then lastly, we have this API permissions, wherein we should specify which specific permissions which we will need while we are implementing this particular API or this application. So we have at least this part ready. Now that we have this Azure Ready app registration ready, next thing is we will move for creating our .NET based application. And for that, we will use something called as ngrok, or even few people call it as ngrok. So based on your choice, you can call it either ngrok or ngrok. So just for the simplicity, I will keep calling it as a ngrok. So ngrok is again kind of a free tool which you can easily download from https://ngrok.com, and then you can use that. The reason why we are using ngrok here is that the development experience for creating an app that receives change notification can be challenging, because we do not have to stand up a well-known or an accessible HTTPS secure endpoint to receive the notifications. So a free tool called as ngrok, it simplifies the developer experience, and it simply creates a well-known HTTPS based URL at ngrok website, and any of the traffic that receives will be redirected to our local machine through the reverse proxy. So in a simple words, ngrox allows calls from internet to be directed to your application running locally without any need to create firewall rules. So we can directly make use of ngrok so that it will kind of direct all of the traffic from internet to our local application which we are running locally. So for that, we can download this ngrok from ngrok.com site. So I will move to my development environment where I already have it downloaded at C drive. You can see it here. What we can do is, now that we will start running this ngrok, and for that we can simply use the statement called as ngrok http 5000. So what it will do is it will start the ngrok instance on a port called as 5000. So here we can simply see that here we have something called as a forwarding rule. So we have two forwarding rules here on HTTP. One some kind of an GUID, not exactly GUID, but some random number .ngrok.io, which will redirect all of the traffic which is coming to this particular URL to our localhost at 5000 port, which we have mentioned. At the same time, all of the HTTPS traffic moving to this particular URL, which is starting with 72be.ngrok.io, even it will be transferred to our localhost at port number 5000. The only thing is, like, for example, if I stop this application now and we will run it one more time, you can see that it starts, but now it has generated some other URL. So every time when you will start ngrok, it will create a new URL. The reason is that we are using this free version of ngrok. But for example, if you want to have a specific URL for your application, so that you don't have to rely on the random number, or this random string being generated by ngrok. In that case, we can utilize the paid service from ngrok, and then we can register our domain with ngrok, and then we can easily use that domain name .ngrok.io within our applications, so that we don't have to change our applications every time when there will be a new ngrok URL that will be generated. So, but at least for this particular demo, we are using this free plan. Even you can see here, it is a free plan. So for that reason, we will make use of this randomly generated string for us. So this string right now is 4723 .ngrok.io. So this is the port, or at least this is the URL where we will host our application, and then we will try to get the change notification from Microsoft Graphs onto this URL. Okay. The next thing here is that we will need ASP.NET Core Web API project. And then to create that ASP.NET Core Web API project, we can simply use the command called as .NET new Web API -o change notifications. So that means it will create a new Web API project on a .NET Core platform with a name of change notifications. So once we have our that application ready, what we can do is we can add some packages, some kind of a NuGet packages to it, and then we will need here two packages. First one is Microsoft.identity.client, so that we will be able to get authenticated against Microsoft Graph and make use of it. And then secondly itself, we will need Microsoft Graph package, so that we will be able to interact with the Microsoft Graph endpoints or the REST APIs which we have from Microsoft Graph. So once we add that package, we will write some code by which we'll be able to get notifications from Microsoft Graph as and when there will be any kind of changes happening to the user profile. And then once we build our application, or once we are done with the development of our application, we can go ahead and build and run this application altogether using .NET Build and .NET Run. So this is the simple steps that we will follow while developing our project. So let's see a demo of this creating this ASP.NET Core Web API project. So I already went ahead, ran that command, and we have this project generated here. And here we have one file called as appsettings.json, wherein we will have to specify few values which will be useful for our application to run. So first thing here, we have something called as app ID. So if you remember this step one, where we created Azure AD app registration, and we want to make our application aware of or our .NET application which we are building right now to be aware of the Azure AD app registration that we did. So in that case, we'll have to specify that app ID, the app secret, the tenant ID, that means onto which tenant that Azure AD app registration is running on, and then this ngrok URL onto which we will get our notifications. So first, let's look at the first property, which is app ID. So app ID is again same thing, how we can get it from Azure application. So for that, let me again go back to Azure AD portal. We will again open the app registrations and the app that we have created. So the app that we created was graph notification demo. Once we move to the overview section of this graph notification demo or the app or API that we have created here, from here we'll be able to get that application ID, which is B499, which we have it here. Then this app secret is the secret ID or this secret value that we generated from here. So which I already had created and which I set to never expire. So that one is starting with C-S. Now that you can see this value, but after the demo, I will clear this value and then I will regenerate new client secret which can be used in our applications. Okay. So that two parts we will have to mention here. The tenant ID is nothing but the ID of our Office 365 tenant, and again you can get it from overview sections. Once you go to the overview, here we have the directory ID or the tenant ID, which is representing the ID of your Office 365 tenant, which is something TE348, which we have specified here. Okay, and then we will have to update this ngrok URL onto which our application or this ngrok application is running on. So for that, I will again go back to the ngrok, and then we will simply copy this URL and we will update into our applications. Let me do that quickly. Now that our application is aware of the ngrok URL where it is running, and then it is aware of the application ID, application secret, and tenant ID, by which it will be able to get authenticated against the Azure AD app registration that we have. And that application registration that we created has an access to this Graph API, by which we will be able to get the information about users inside our Microsoft 365 tenant. Okay. So now that all this configuration is just inside a simple JSON file, but we should read this from the JSON file and use in our application. So for that, we have startup.cs, inside which what we can do is when or at least the startup.cs will be invoked whenever we will start our application. So it will invoke these configure services, and inside that we are simply reading those values and binding those values inside one object called as myconfig, and that myconfig class is simple like this, where we have properties with getter and setters for application ID, application secret, tenant ID, and the ngrok URL. So that means all of the application configurations that we are specifying inside app settings JSON are being captured inside this object. And then we will make use of this object, this configuration object inside our application. So we will maybe I will just wait here for some time until we get to this notification. But at least this is the class which we will be using, or this is the model that we'll be using for storing our notifications. So first thing is like we have this change type. That means what kind of an change that we need to get notified about. And then we have something called as client state. So client state is something kind of an unique value that will help us to uniquely identify that particular request which we are getting from Microsoft Graph. And then we have something called as resource. So that means the endpoint that we want to hit of Microsoft Graph. And in this scenario, we want to get the information from users. So we will hit that users endpoint, or rather we will use the resource called as users. And then we have something called as subscription expiration date time, subscription ID and resource data, which we will come a bit later. And then we have something called as a resource data, which is specific to holding that particular resource, wherein we will store the ID of that particular resource, the E tag, and the OData ID and OData type. So this is specific to the Graph API. So with that basic setup of ASP.NET Core Web API project, let's again come back to the slides. and then we'll see like how we can create those change notification subscriptions. Okay, the major thing here is that now that we want our application to be notified whenever there is any kind of an activity happening at Microsoft Graph end. So for example, if someone has modified the user profile property of any of the user, in that case, Microsoft Graph should send us the notification that there is a change in the user profile property, and then we should act on it. And for all those subscriptions, we have an endpoint from Graph called as graph.microsoft.com/subscription. So we can handle or invoke all those subscription on this particular endpoint. So here the life cycle is something like your application is notified of any of the activity. Uh, so it could be a file change into the OneDrive, or it could be a file change into a SharePoint, or even it could be any of the user profile property change. And then this activity should be notified by creating a subscription with Microsoft Graph. The subscription tells Microsoft Graph what entities you want to receive the notifications about and the address of your web API to post them to. So that means now that we want to get our notifications about any of the user profile property changes, and we want Graph API to notify us on the ngrok URL which we are running. And then again, obviously, this developer must renew this subscription for notification as needed, as all subscription have an expiration time associated with them. So if the subscription is not renewed, it will eventually expire. So you will have to keep track of the subscription and make sure that you renew them at the regular interval. So the change notification that your app receives from Microsoft Graphs can allow you to track the changes of entities if you need to replicate the data in your own system. And then after creating this Azure Ready app, the code in your web app must obtain the access token to submit request to the Microsoft Graph. And then we can create the change notification subscription by submitting a simple HTTP post request to the subscription endpoint which we just saw. So again, the simple concept here will be like we will always have to consider these change notification subscription length. The maximum subscription length is 3 days for most of the resources, and then we should renew the subscription before it expires so that we will continue to get the notifications from the Graph API. So this is how the life cycle is for all of the subscriptions that we do. So the subscription here is a simple JSON format thing. So this is one example of the user update subscription that we are going to use inside our application. So what we will do is we will simply post to graph.microsoft.com/subscription endpoint, and then we will uh, we will pass the authorization bearer token. The content type will be the application JSON. Host here is graph.microsoft.com. And since we want to make use of the change type on the updated, so here we have resource specified as the slash users. That means we are listening onto the users endpoint, and then we want to get notified whenever there is any change or any of the update happening to the user profile property. So that means, for example, if location of the user has been changed, or for example, if manager of the user has been changed. So in those cases, what we will do is we will create a notification subscription on users endpoint whenever it is updated. And then this client state is nothing but some kind of an unique value which will help us to identify the notification that we have created. Because when we will build a production ready applications, we might have multiple notification subscriptions created, maybe one for users, one maybe for notification about any of the file changes which are happening. So this client state will help us to uniquely define all of those notification subscriptions. And this notification URL is our ngrok URL, which will be at /API/notifications. We will see like how we can generate this. And then obviously in the production version, this ngrok URL will be updated with your uh, actual value of your web app. And then each of these notification has got expiration date and time associated with that, and we should make a note of this expiration date time, so that whenever it is about to expire, we should renew it so that we can continue to get all those notifications. So let's again jump back to the demo and see like how this works. So for that purpose, what we have done is we have created new controller called as notifications controller. So again, this will take the values from our configuration in the my config object, and then what it can do, firstly that we, we need to get the information about the users which are updated. So for that purpose, we will simply create this graph client, or we will make use of get graph client. For example, if I move to the definition of this get graph client, it is very simple definition. So here we are creating a new graph service client, and then we are simply passing the access token to it, so that we will be able to get authenticated against that graph, and we will be able to get the values. So this part will just create the headers for our authorization purpose, and once we have this, we will have our graph client ready, onto which we can post or get the endpoint, or from where we will get the information about all of the information that we have inside Microsoft 365. So we will get that graph client, and then we will create one subscription for users. So here what we will do is we are creating that, or hitting that resource of slash users. That means we are interested to get the notification about users, and again in the user we are interested to get the updated kind of a notification. So that means any of the user profile property of a user has been updated. And then again we are simply setting this expiration date time for 5 minutes. So that means the subscription that we are creating against the user updated graph endpoint will be valid for 5 minutes. And then again we will see like how we can get the notification about this expiring subscription, and then how we can renew that. And this is just the client state, a unique value to represent that. Once we have that, what we can do is we will create that subscription, and then add that subscription against Microsoft Graph, so that it will give us the information whenever there is any kind of an changes happening. The second information, we will come back to this part bit later. And once we have that information, we'll just simply return this thing to our client, that we have subscribed with this particular ID and this particular expiration date time. Then what we have is the post call, by which we'll be able to handle all those notification on behalf of Graph client. So here, if we don't have the valid token, we will get the valid token, and then we will get into the code of handling all of this notification. In that case, we will get all of the request body, and try to read the content inside of it. So now that we have got the request from, or the response from our graph client, and then we will go into the each of those notification items, and then we will see like onto which object we have got the notification for. So that means the resource, so it could be user, it could be file, and then what is the ID of that particular resource. So even in the production ready applications, you can get more information from this resource data, like exactly which file has been changed, the URL, or even in case of users, the name of the user, even the ID and other parameters of that user. And once it is done, we are done with our basic part, by which we'll be able to get the notifications from the Graph API. So what we will do here now is we already have this graph, not graph, the ngrok URL running, or this ngrok application running onto this port, which we have already taken it to our site. So now that what we will do is we will build this application and start running this application. So for that we will run .NET build and .NET run. So we will build it and we will run it with one command. So once it is built and it is up and running, uh, okay, luckily we don't have warning, we don't have any errors. It is very simple code. And now that we have our application running, and then if you want to see this application, what we can do is we have uh, this controller created as /API/notification, and then we have our ngrok running at this particular URL. So that means if I directly go to HTTP localhost 5000 slash API slash notification, we should be able to hit this endpoint. So for that, I will simply go ahead and we will go to HTTP localhost 5000 slash API slash notification. And now that we can see this message subscribed with this particular ID, and the expiration is set to 5 minutes after we are invoking. So it is 4:43 p.m. and this particular subscription will end at 4:48, which is 5 minutes from now. And all of that information is coming from here because now that we have subscribed. Okay, so what we will do now is we want to get notified whenever there is any change in the user profile property when it is updated. So once it is updated, we should get our notifications at this particular endpoint. Okay, so what I will do for that purpose is we will keep this application running just to make updates to the user profile property. We will again go back to our Azure AD portal where we have our users from Office 365. We'll click all users, and then probably I will just open up my user. I will edit this user, and again maybe I will change this office location to some numeric value, and we will save this. Again, just for making it more interactive, I will again go back to the users. Probably we will change it for one more user called as Lee. We will edit this, and again probably we'll just set it to some other value. Okay, and we'll save. So now that we have two users for which the user profile property has been changed, and once the graph API is able to detect that change, that means we have changes into the user profile properties of two users, it should be able to detect that, and then it should give us that value back saying that okay, there are changes to the two user profile properties with the ID of that particular resource. That means the code which we have created here in the post, and we should be able to see the value being written by the Microsoft Graph. That means the notification that we have created. So the resource here that we created, okay, and now that we have those values here, if I select this value, this is the first notification that we have received, and this one is for Microsoft.graph.user. That means the user which we have changed, and then we can be able to get the values about uh, for which user it has changed. So for now that it is giving us the value being changed for E125, this particular GUID. And for example, if I again go back to my users, um, now that at least this user is not the one which is being reported. If I go back to my user, and we should see the object ID, it is the same one, E125, which is being reported. So this is the first notification that we have received, and the second notification is about the second user which has changed. So what we can do with this kind of an application is that we don't have to implement any kind of an polling infrastructure for our applications, but what we can simply do is we can make that Microsoft Graph aware of any of the changes happening inside our resources, including users, files, even the messages. And when there is any kind of a change inside that properties which we are interested in, graph itself will notify us, and then we'll be able to process that value. So now in this example we are just taking the ID, but again based on what kind of an object you are accessing, you will be able to get all those values, and then from there you will be able to make or start creating your own business cases. Okay. So with that, again, go back to the next part, which is like how can we renew those change notification subscriptions. So now that these change notification subscriptions will be valid for a specified amount of time, and after that time, the notifications subscription is automatically purged from the Microsoft Graph. So this means if your application does nothing after creating the subscription, it will only receive notifications up to the expiration time specified when the subscription was created. And to address this, you could also have another process on a timer that verifies the notifications are received within the subscription window. And if not, you can assume the subscription has likely to be expired or needs to be recreated. The recommended approach in this case is to have one process that handles the change notification and a separate process that creates, monitors, manages, and even renews all of these change notification subscriptions. So now that at least we have a simple understanding of the notifications that we have, but now that we should look into how we can renew those change notifications. So it is kind of a process of renewing just the subscription, and this is done by submitting an HTTP patch kind of a request to the endpoint of that particular subscription. And then the body of that request includes just a single property, which is the new date timestamp of this new expiration date. So that means we just want to simply extend our subscription by this much amount. Okay, so for that, again, let's go into the demo and see like how we can do that. So now that, let me go to the get access token and all those things. Now that we have these two values here. First one is check the subscription. What it will do is at a regular interval, it will check the subscription that we have. And again, for example, if you see here, at regular interval, we have these messages checking subscription and then current subscription count that we have. And then again, for here, even the highlighted value which you see here, we have renewed this particular subscription, and now that the new expiration is again 5 more minutes. So this can be done by simply getting all those subscription that we have, and then the subscription which is coming to an end, what we can do simply is we can simply just have the post request done to it, and then we will specify the new expiration date time by just adding 5 more minutes to it. So that means all of the subscription which are kind of an ending in next 2 minutes here, we will simply call this renew subscription, and then that renew subscription will simply add 5 more minutes to that subscription. So at least means right now in this particular application we are doing it in only one application, but again in the production ready applications where you will have multiple subscriptions running at regular interval, what you can do is probably you can have multiple applications or at least two applications. First one will get the subscription or get the notification, and the second one will just monitor all of the subscriptions that we have. And then again, for all of these subscriptions which are about to expire in a certain duration, in our case in next 2 minutes, what we will do simply is we will extend that subscription by 5 minutes. So we are simply adding 5 more minutes to it, and then it will get renewed. So this is one instance. And again, for example, if we wait for 5 more minutes, then obviously again it will check for those getting expired kind of an subscription, and it will renew those subscriptions again. So this is the simple code that we have, which will help us to create the subscription, watch for the expiring subscription, and it will simply renew all those subscriptions for us. So again, just to quickly recap, like all of the subscription endpoints that we have. So first one, we have this create subscription, uh, to which we can just simply have this HTTP post request done at subscriptions level, and then we should include the details of the subscription in the request body. So here we will have firstly maybe the notification URL where the notifications should be sent. Then the next one what we saw was the change type. That means the type of change to trigger the notification. For example, we want to get the notification for user has been changed or user profile property has been changed. Thirdly, we might have there is the expiration date time. That means the timestamp for the expiration of that particular subscription. And then we have the client state which refers to your registered endpoint. So at least to create that subscription, we should have this much of information. And then once we get all the subscription, simply then we can run this command list subscription, and then it will give us all of the subscriptions that we have. So it will retrieve all of those active non-expired subscriptions. And then again, just to get one subscription, you can hit this endpoint with the GUID which is written by subscription. For example, if I again go back to my graph explorer here and type subscription, we should be able to get all the subscriptions that we have here. And then again, based on the now that we have we don't have any subscription right now here, but at least once we have it, we should be able to get all those subscriptions. And then just to get one subscription, we can get to that GUID and we will get more information. And then for example, if you want to update the subscription for any kind of an expiration time, we want to extend that subscription, we can again have the HTTP patch request with the new date timestamp. And then once we are done with our application, we are kind of closing down our application. In that case, we can simply go ahead and put the HTTP delete request with the GUID for which we have created the subscription, and then it will simply delete that existing subscription, and we won't be able to use it again. Then again, for example, if you want to reuse, we should recreate the subscription with same kind of an information that we want to get. So at least these are the major endpoints that we should be aware of whenever we are creating this kind of an Microsoft graph based notifications for us. So again, in various scenarios, you can use those maybe for any kind of file changes, any kind of user profile changes. And then once you get those notifications, you can build your own business logic from that configuration onwards. So at least these are the endpoints we just saw this demo. And then these are kind of an resources which will help you get started more with this Microsoft graph. And then again, the session inspiration of how to build with Microsoft graph. And then again, there's a beautiful screencast available from Andrew Connell where he has explained this into more details. And then, for example, if you want to get this code which we just saw, it is available at the GitHub repository. Probably even I will paste this link to the chat window. But yeah, Miss, I guess that was all from our side. And thank you for having us, and thank you for listening to us.